My uncle said the word at a funeral. Someone asked why I was crying. He said, "He's always been sensitive." I was 32 years old. I had heard that word from my family more times than I had heard my own name spoken with warmth. Every question I ever asked ended the same way. About money when I was 15 and my father started sleeping in the basement. About my mother's disappearances when I was 21 and she would leave for 3 days without an explanation. About why my grandmother stopped speaking to us at every holiday dinner for 5 years before she died. "You're too sensitive. Don't make things uncomfortable. That's just how things are." The word was a door closing. It meant stop asking. It meant you were the problem. It meant I was broken in a way that no one needed to name because everyone could see it. At the funeral, I did something I had never done before. My grandmother's funeral. The same grandmother who stopped speaking to us. I stood by the coffee urn, and my uncle put his hand on my shoulder, and someone asked why I was crying, and he said the word again. Sensitive. Like it was a diagnosis. Like it explained everything. I turned to him, and I asked a question I already knew the answer to. I asked him why my grandmother really stopped coming to dinner. I did not whisper it. I did not apologize for asking. I just stood there with tears on my face, and I looked at him. And for the first time in my life, someone in my family told me the truth. I learned the word when I was 9. My father left on a Tuesday and never came back. I remember packing my backpack for school and hearing my mother on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was different. Flat. I asked where he went. She said that was not a helpful question. I asked again at dinner. She put her fork down and looked at me and said I was being sensitive. That was the first time I remember hearing it applied to me like a diagnosis. Like something was wrong with me for asking. I did not ask about my father again. He did not come back. The word followed me through every family dinner and every holiday and every moment when something felt wrong and I opened my mouth to ask why. My mother was 61 when I was in my 20s, tired in a way that looked permanent. She avoided direct answers like other people avoided traffic. I would ask if she had heard from my father. She would say the weather was nice. I would ask why we did not see my grandmother anymore. She would say I was making things difficult. My grandmother stopped speaking to us when I was 14. No phone calls. No holidays. No explanation. I asked what happened. My aunt said nothing happened. She said I was imagining things. She said I had always been too sensitive. I was 14 years old and I did not know what I had done wrong, but I believed her. I believed all of them. I stopped asking questions out loud after that. I wrote them in a notebook instead. A black notebook I kept under my bed. Every question I could not say at the dinner table went into that book. Why did my father leave? What did my grandmother do? Why does my mother look at me like I am hurting her when I ask about anything real? The notebook filled up. Pages of questions no one would answer. My family stayed quiet. They ate dinner together and talked about work and the weather and whose turn it was to bring dessert. They acted like nothing was wrong. And I sat at the table with my mouth shut and my notebook hidden, and I believed for years that I was the problem, that I was too much, that asking for the truth was the same as breaking something. That is what the word did. It made me stop trusting myself before I was old enough to know what trust was supposed to feel like. My grandfather died when I was 24. Cancer. Fast. 3 months from diagnosis to the funeral. I stood next to my Uncle Mark at the reception. He is my mother's brother. Loud at parties. Silent during problems. He was holding a cup of coffee and making small talk with someone who worked at the funeral home. I waited until that person walked away. Then I asked my uncle why my grandfather had not spoken to my father for 15 years before he left. My grandfather had chosen a side when my parents split. He picked my mother. He never explained why. He just stopped saying my father's name. For 15 years. I wanted to know what my father had done. My uncle laughed. Not a happy laugh. A tired one. He said I was digging for something that was not there. I asked again. I said 15 years is a long time to stop talking to someone for no reason. He looked at me and he said, "There you go. Being sensitive again." Like the word was a key that fit every lock. Like he did not have to answer because he had the word. He walked away to get more coffee. I stood there watching him go, and I realized he had no intention of ever telling me the truth. I started watching my family differently after that. Not as a participant. As someone observing a machine I did not understand. I noticed how conversations stopped when I entered a room. How my mother would look at my aunt before answering any question I asked. How my uncle would change the subject whenever I asked something specific about my father or my grandmother, or any of the gaps in our history that no one would fill. They were not protecting me from something painful. They were protecting themselves from having to say it out loud. And they had trained me since I was 9 years old to believe that my questions were the problem, so they would never have to answer them. The pattern was not about me being wrong. I sat with that thought for months after my grandfather's funeral. The pattern was about me being the only one willing to name what everyone else saw. My father leaving. My grandmother disappearing. My mother sleeping in a separate room for years before the divorce was final. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew. But no one asked, because asking would have meant admitting that something was broken. And my family had built an entire language around pretending things were fine. The word sensitive was not a description of me. It was a tool. And they had been using it on me since I was 9 years old to keep me quiet so they could keep pretending. I asked Rachel at a birthday party. My cousin's birthday. She is my uncle's daughter, 2 years younger than me. We grew up in the same houses at the same holidays. She always watched everything from corners. Never the one asking questions. Just the one who saw things and kept her mouth shut. I pulled her aside in the kitchen while everyone else was eating cake. I asked her what everyone was hiding. I did not whisper. I did not soften it. I just asked. She looked at her feet. Then she looked at the door like she was making sure no one could hear. She said, "You're going to be mad at me." I said I was already mad at everyone. That was not entirely true. I was tired. Tired of being the only person in my family who wanted to know why things had fallen apart. But I said mad because mad was easier to explain. She told me my father had not just left. My mother had asked him to leave. There was a reason. Rachel would not tell me the reason. She said it was not her story. I asked whose story it was. She said my mother's. Well, my father's. But not hers. I stood there in the kitchen with the sound of people laughing in the other room, and I asked who I needed to talk to. She said no one would tell me. They had all agreed years ago. She said it quietly like she was admitting something shameful. You are the sensitive one. They think you could not handle it. I drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel. Not from anger. From the confirmation that I had been right for 23 years. There was something my mother asked my father to leave for. Something my grandmother stopped speaking to us about. Something my aunt and my uncle and maybe Rachel herself had all decided I was too fragile to hear. The word sensitive had never been about whether I could feel things. It was about whether they trusted me with the truth. And the answer after 23 years was still no. I stopped coming to family dinners after Rachel told me the truth. Not the full truth. Just enough to know there was one. I stopped showing up on Sundays. I stopped answering group texts. I stopped pretending that sitting at a table full of people who had decided I was too weak for the truth was something I wanted to do with my life. No one called to ask why. That told me everything. Not one phone call. Not one text asking if I was okay. I was not missed. I was the question they did not want to answer. Without me, there were no uncomfortable questions. No one asking about my father. No one asking about my grandmother. Just dinner and small talk and the quiet hum of a family that worked better when I was not in the room. My mother left me a voicemail after 3 months. Her voice sounded the same. Tired. Careful. She said she missed me. She said I was being dramatic. She used the word sensitive. Like she had been storing it for 3 months, waiting to use it again. I did not call back. I listened to the voicemail 3 times, and then I deleted it. I did not need to hear that word from her mouth ever again. She had been saying it to me since I was 9 years old. I was 32 now. I was done being talked out of my own questions. I started asking older relatives instead. Great aunts, family friends, people who were not part of the agreement. People who had been at the weddings and the funerals and the holidays, but who did not sit at the dinner table when the hard questions came up. Most of them hung up. One of them said they did not want to get involved. Another one said some things were better left in the past. They had all been trained the same way I had been trained, to keep quiet, to protect the family, to call anyone who asked too many questions sensitive. But one of them did not hang up. My great-aunt Carol, my grandmother's sister. She listened to me on the phone for 20 minutes. She asked if I was sure I wanted to know. I said I had been sure since I was 9 years old. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she would talk to me. In person, not over the phone. She said there were things she had been waiting to say for 12 years. 12 years. She had been holding something since before my grandmother stopped speaking to us. Since before my father left. Since before I was born, maybe. And she had been waiting for someone to ask. Helen met me at a diner 2 towns over. She is 78 years old. My grandmother's sister. She was cut off from the family for reasons no one had ever explained to me. I always assumed she did something wrong. Now I was sitting across from her watching her light a cigarette, even though the sign on the wall said not to. Her hands were steady. She looked at me like she had been waiting for this conversation for longer than I had been alive. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask about my mother. She just started talking. She said my father left because he was not my father. I stared at her. She said my mother had an affair with a man she worked with. I was that man's son. My father found out when I was a baby. He stayed for 8 more years. Then he could not stay anymore. He left on a Tuesday. The Tuesday I remembered. The Tuesday I had been asking about my whole life. He left because looking at me every day reminded him of what my mother had done. And my mother let him leave. She let me believe he walked out for no reason. She let me spend 23 years wondering what I did wrong. Helen took a long drag off her cigarette. She said my mother begged everyone to keep it secret. She said I was too sensitive to handle the truth. The family agreed. My grandmother agreed. My aunt agreed. My uncle agreed. They had been protecting my mother's lie for 3 decades. Every time I asked a question, they called me sensitive. Every time I got close to something real, they shut me down with that word. Not because I was fragile, because the truth would have exposed my mother. And they chose her over me. They chose her comfort over my right to know who I was. I asked who my real father was. Helen said he died in 1999. Car accident. I would never meet him. She had his name written down at home on a piece of paper she had been keeping in a drawer for 12 years. She said she had been waiting for someone to ask. She would give it to me if I wanted. I sat in that diner booth and I looked at her and I did not know what to say. A dead man who never knew I existed. A name that meant nothing to me but was half of who I am. My mother lied to me my whole life. My father left because he could not love someone else's child. And my family called me sensitive every time I tried to understand why my life never felt like it belonged to me. I asked Helen if she thought I could handle the name. She said that was not her question to answer. She said I had been handling things my family could not handle since I was 9 years old. That was the first time anyone in my family had ever said something that sounded like belief. I drove to my mother's house that night. I did not call first. I did not text. I just drove. The sun was down and the streets were quiet, and I pulled into her driveway like I had done 1,000 times before, but this time felt different. This time I knew. I knocked. She opened the door, and I watched her face change. She saw the answer on my face before I said a word. She stepped back from the doorway. She asked who told me. Not what. Who? She knew exactly what I had learned. She had been waiting for this moment for 23 years, and she still was not ready for it. I walked inside. I stood in her living room. The same living room where I had sat through every holiday and every dinner and every moment where I felt like an outsider in my own family. I asked if my father knew. The man who raised me. The man who left on a Tuesday when I was 9. I asked if he knew I was not his before he left. She said yes. She said he knew for 5 years before he walked out. He found out when I was 4. He stayed because he loved me. He left because he could not look at her anymore. Not because of me, because of what she did. I had spent my whole life thinking he walked away from me. He walked away from her. I was just standing next to her when he did. I asked why she did not tell me. She said the word. Sensitive. She said it like she had said it 1,000 times before. Like it was a reflex. I asked if she believed it, or if it was just easier than saying she was ashamed. She did not answer. She stood there with her arms crossed and her mouth shut, and she did not answer. The silence was the only honest thing she had ever given me. No deflection, no word, just the quiet of a woman who had spent 30 years protecting herself at the expense of her son and had run out of things to say. I'm over it where silence ends. Subscribe if any of this sounds familiar. I looked at her for a long time. I thought about every question I ever asked. Every time she called me sensitive. Every time she made me feel like I was the problem. I thought about my notebook full of questions hidden under my bed. I thought about Helen lighting a cigarette in a diner and telling me the truth my mother should have told me when I was old enough to hear it. I asked my mother if she had anything else to say to me. She shook her head. I walked out. I did not look back. I did not slam the door. I just left, the same way my father left, the same way my mother had been leaving me my whole life without ever getting up from the dinner table. I asked my mother one question at her kitchen table. She was sitting down. I was standing. I had driven all the way there and walked through her door and stood in her living room, and now I was looking at her across the same table where she had called me sensitive 100 times. I said, was I ever too sensitive? Or was I just asking questions you did not want to answer? She cried. I did not. I had spent 23 years crying over this family, over my father leaving, over never belonging, over being told I was too much. I was done crying. She said she was protecting me. I said she was protecting herself. She shook her head. She said I did not understand what it was like to be her, to be young, to make a mistake, to have a husband who stayed for 5 years out of obligation and then left anyway, to have a son who looked at her every day with questions she could not answer. I said she never tried to understand what it was like to be me, raised by a man who was not my father, told my whole life that my curiosity was a flaw, taught to doubt my own instincts because the truth would be inconvenient for her. I was 9 years old when I started asking where my father went. 9 years old when she told me I was being sensitive. She had 32 years to tell me the truth. She chose the word instead. She said, "You were always so much." She said it quietly, like it was the truest thing she had ever said to me. I looked at her for a second. Then I said, "You were always so little." She flinched like I had hit her. Her whole body went still. I think that was the first time anyone had ever told her the truth about herself the way she should have told me the truth about myself. Not cruel, just honest. She was little courage, little honesty, little willingness to be the bad guy in someone else's story, even when she deserved to be. I stood up. I walked out. I did not look back. I heard her say my name behind me. I kept walking. I got in my car and I drove away from that house. I did not know if I would ever go back. The word sensitive did not mean anything to me anymore. It was not a description of who I was. It was a confession of who she was. Someone who could not handle being seen. And I had been seeing her my whole life. She just did not want to be seen. That was never my problem. That was always hers. My mother called my aunt before I made it to my car. I was still backing out of the driveway when my phone lit up with my aunt's name. She never called me. I was always the one who called her. I answered. She asked what I had done to my mother. She said I had been cruel. I did not defend myself. I just asked if she knew about my real father. She went silent. I could hear her breathing. I said I would take that as yes. She said I was burning bridges I would regret. I said the bridges were made of lies, and I was tired of walking on them. She said I did not have to be like this. I asked like what? She said bitter. I said I was not bitter. I was done. There's a difference. She did not understand the difference. She hung up. My uncle called 2 days later. He did not say hello. He asked if I was going to tell everyone. I asked if he meant tell the truth. He hung up. That was the whole conversation. He called to find out how much damage I was going to do, and when he realized I was not going to promise to stay quiet, he decided he did not want to hear it. That was my family, not people who loved me. People who managed me, who kept me at a certain distance so I could not hurt them with my questions. the same way they had been doing since I was 9 years old. I have not spoken to my mother in 8 months. She has sent 3 letters. I have not opened any of them. The first one came a week after that night at her kitchen table. The second one came on my birthday. The third one came last month. They are sitting in a drawer in my bedroom. I do not know what they say. I'm not sure I ever want to know. I spent 32 years listening to her words, her explanations, her justifications, her reasons why I was too much and too sensitive and too curious for my own good. I do not owe her another chance to convince me that I am the problem. She had 32 years to tell me the truth. She had 32 years to stop calling me sensitive and start calling herself afraid. She did not. Those letters can wait in that drawer until I decide if I care what she has to say. Right now, I do not. Right now, I'm learning what it feels like to trust my own questions without someone telling me I'm broken for asking them. It feels like being alone, but it feels like being alone on purpose. And that is better than sitting at a table full of people who have been lying to me my whole life. I met a man 6 months ago at a coffee shop. We started talking. He asked about my family after a few weeks. I told him the truth. The whole thing. My mother. The affair. The man who raised me and left. The real father I never met. He listened. He did not call me sensitive. He did not tell me I was digging for something that was not there. He asked if I wanted to talk about it more. That was the first time I understood that curiosity is not a flaw. My family just needed it to be one. Because if I was not broken for asking questions, then they were broken for refusing to answer. And they could not live with that. I have Helen's letter with my real father's name. A piece of paper in an envelope in the same drawer as my mother's letters. I have not looked him up. He died before I could ask him anything. Before I could even know his name. That door is closed. I'm learning to be fine with closed doors. Not every question gets an answer. Not every truth sets you free. Sometimes the truth just sits there, quiet, heavy, and you have to decide whether to carry it or put it down. I am still deciding. My mother sent a 4th letter last week. I opened it. I do not know why. Maybe I was tired of wondering. Maybe I wanted to see if she had learned anything in 8 months. She wrote 2 sentences. I'm sorry. I was scared. That was it. No explanation. No defense. No mention of the word sensitive. Just 2 sentences that should have come 23 years ago. I have not responded. I might not. For the first time in my life, I am not asking myself what I should do. I am asking what I want. And what I want right now is to let her sit with her apology the way I sat with her silence my whole childhood. If she means it, she can say it again. If she does not, then the letters will stop, and I will know that too. The word sensitive still lands in my chest sometimes. Someone says it at work or in a conversation, and I feel it hit. But it lands differently now. It lands like a key I did not know I was holding. Not a weapon. Not a wound. Just proof that I was willing to ask questions no one else would ask. That I was willing to be uncomfortable so I could find out who I really was. My family gave me that word to keep me small. I am the one who decided it could make me larger instead. I am the one who decided to stop asking for permission to know my own life. Am over at where silence ends. What word did your family use to shut you down when you asked questions they did not want to answer?